And before we talk about this, I just wanted to say, of course, this is part of a larger series that is connected mostly to the beautiful show Stories, which has got a presence in mostly the Rubin Gallery, and also in the hall, and also in Center Gallery, all of which comes from the collection of Dilip and Makimeto here this evening. We're very, very grateful to them for this loan and for sharing their considerable art collection. This is just a tiny fraction of a very, 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 very large collection of African art. They also collect Indian miniatures and Japanese woodblock prints and beautiful art glass, and moreover are wonderfully nice people to work with, and very generous to Oglethorpe, and hopefully happy with what we're doing. So part of this whole process is to have lecture series and concerts, and if you haven't gotten them, there's a little brochure at the front that you can pick up where you can just look at OU Connect. Taylor Roberts, and I don't know how long I'm going to tell this story, but probably until, like I said, you're giving me recommendations as I'm getting toward retirement. She came to me last year as a freshman and said, I want to be the Gordon Ramsay of museums. And I said, oh my gosh, who is this amazing person that I have to talk to? Let's talk about museums. And I think really Gordon Ramsay, if she ever meets you, is really going to want to be you. Because everything she's done, she does with excellence. And she's now in my museum studies class and contributing beautifully to that. Taylor worked with us voluntarily at the museum as she was also writing an application to be in the High Mellon Summer Academy last year, which she did along with another student, Myri Dowdy. Two of them finished that, and she was one of only 2 students in all of Atlanta to receive a more than $30,000 Mellon Fellowship. So I just keep saying that on camera for posterity, that this is what Taylor has done. She's not new to this field either. The tender age of she's 19. So at the tender age of 19, she's had much more experience in museums than most 19-year-olds, and started, I believe, at 13, 14 years old at the Adler Planetarium in Chicago. Also worked at the Contemporary there, and early on understood what she wanted to do. Laser-focused person, really, really happy to know her, and I'm excited that she's going to talk about one of my favorite topics, museums and social change. So, Taylor Roberts.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I first of all would like to thank you all for coming, and I'd like to thank John and Elizabeth for allowing me to be here and speak on this topic. Before I start, I'd like to ask you all a couple of questions. So, how many of you regularly visit museums? Great people, amazing. And how many people have pieces that they love? So, if any of you would mind just sharing a particular piece that you love, that's your favorite piece, just go ahead.
I believe that you're something
Amazing.
There's this huge piece in that, I can't remember the artist right now, but it's in like a horse fair, and it's like what?
It's Rosa Bonheur.
Yes. And it's this like huge horse fair, and just as someone who like grew up around horses, it's like just it takes up the whole wall of that, and it's exquisite. So yeah.
Anyone else like to share?
I love all of the Frank Lloyd Wright behind.
So it's pieces like the ones that you described that you love that made me passionate about museums, and I'm just going to share a couple of my favorite pieces with you. First is going to be the Montgomery Meeting House, which is right in the center there. It's a piece within the Field Museum where visitors get to the opportunity to take off their shoes. They get to enter the space of one of the first homes of the settlers of New Zealand. The Montgomery Meeting House is one of only 3 houses that are outside of New Zealand, so it's a very amazing experience people get to have in the city of Chicago. Next is going to be Sky Above the Clouds, which is a Georgia O'Keeffe painting within the Art Institute's collection, and this is the painting that invites you into the museum's modern wing. So it's something that I've been seeing for almost my entire life. Bouquet of Flowers within the Highest collection, the Pissarro piece, which is my favorite piece in the European collection. Destination Solar System in the corner over there, which, as Elizabeth said, I worked at the Adler Planetarium for 5 years, and I've seen Destination Solar System more than 10 times, and each time you get an enthusiastic guide who takes you throughout the solar system. Coordination by Nadine Robinson, which is my favorite piece in all of the Highest collection. because it's the only piece that I've ever encountered that translates blackness into a sound. And lastly, the portrait of O'Keeffe by Tom Webb, which is my favorite. Also kind of the Tolliver as well, but we're gonna go with the O'Keeffe. It's my favorite piece within the OUMA collection. So while viewers who visit museums simultaneously see images like these, they also see images like these. We live in a divisive time with a proliferation of images and news often censored or written to affirm our pre-existing beliefs remaining on our minds no matter where we are. The denial of human rights, arguments or discriminations we face never really leave our minds or the news. And I was curious to see the ways that museums function as social agents during these times and whether or not these trusted institutions are giving everything they could for our audiences. What many people don't believe is that museums are already political. Artists depict their lives, which present certain commonalities that are depicted in the news and in headlines. Acquisition of objects can be political. The political standing of the museum staff can determine what's shown and what's not shown, what's bought, and how these amazing pieces are displayed. In Clive Gray's book, The Politics of Museums, he says it's not the fact that museums are political that is important, but rather how these political dimensions of museums can be understood and made sense of, and that's what I'm most intrigued by today. So in many ways, as well as that, firstly, museums act as social agents in many ways. They begin early on with K-12 students, and they're spending more than $2 billion each year on educational activities. Continuing that, museums offer free days. They're committed to ensuring that all Americans of all backgrounds have access to high-quality museum experiences. In 2012, 37% of museums were free at all times or had suggested admission fees only, and nearly all the rest offered free admission days. And of the most distinction is an interesting thing that the Chicago museums do, where museums on the museum campus allow teens to get in for free, continuing that education that they receive in K-12. The High Second Sunday invites family members and members of the community to make impactful art experiences. And I have to say, the first time that I visited the High was on the second Sunday, and it's the first time that I've seen such a large, diverse population having a meaningful, impactful art experience. Museums also participate in community outreach. At the MoMA, printmaking is offered to students in a non-secure educational facility run by the Juvenile Justice Department. The National Museum of Mexican Art in Chicago offers the Park Voyagers program, which is a free educational enrichment program that allows them to get knowledge from museums in informal settings. And the significance of all of these events and these activities is that people get to have high culture education, high culture experiences without worrying about financial burdens, and it allows a diverse population to experience all the art in all the museums. Additionally, museums allow us to have distractions. Viewing beautiful art like this piece of the enthroned Madonna at the Birmingham Museum of Art allows people to think about something besides their positionality. If only for a second, people can focus on the artist's intentions, the colors that they use, the curatorial design, instead of the aspects of their daily lives that trouble them. Museums can also act as a reminder of that times could be much worse, or how far we've come, or how far we have to go. At the Legacy Museum and the Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, there is a detail of the slave trade and the oppression that Black folks have faced throughout America's history. It's also the first memorial for victims of lynching, and this is a reminder that though some of these events were recent, we have made strides in the fight for human rights and civil justice, but we've still got so much further to go. In addition, Montgomery has been changed by these spaces. When you step outside of the memorial or when you step outside of the museum, you realize that the steps you are taking have been taken by much different people under different circumstances, such as the slave trade or during the civil rights movement. It creates a greater feeling of importance with every step that you take. The El Paso Museum of Art in El Paso, Texas recently did a retrospective on Tom Lee and his World War II art. Tom Lee was the World War II eyewitness artist correspondent for Life magazine and became the only painter on the front lines to depict the carnage of the war. These are events that we learn about in history books. Probably, if you're not a history major, things that we learned about in elementary school and maybe extending to high school, but they come to life in museums. We are encouraged to get involved with veteran programs when we see images like like this. We're encouraged to feel sympathy for military families, and we're grateful that we aren't in a state of war. Museums also address politics head-on. The Museum of the City of New York has an exhibition, it's a permanent installation actually, that talks about racial justice today, the movement for Black lives that began in 2017. The exhibition includes photographs, flyers, protest art, and clothing that represent crucial movement milestones. And if it's not the first of its kind, it's the first exhibition that seeks to tell a story of the movement and its growth beyond street protests. Similarly, the New York State Library looks back at immigration as the border wall comes to attention in their May 2018 exhibition, A Nation of Immigrants. We get to see history as it's happening with these types of exhibitions and installations and understand that these attitudes out here as images that are from so many years ago still seem popular, still seem meaningful. But there's an obvious limit to guest engagement. Guests are encouraged to look, think, read, but not create change after participate. Those verbs are reserved for donors, curators, and administrators. And a museum visitor is never asked what kind of exhibition or what exhibition they'd like to see next. Museums have become somewhat cyclical with their legacies and their histories and appear to be returning to the elitist concepts that they were once founded upon. So my question is, why do guests expect interaction and engagement from science museums but not art museums? Why do you encourage kids to visit those and not art museums? The free admission gets people in the door, and it's an amazing thing that occurs. We get people of diverse populations in the door, but what do we do with them once they're here? So the statistics prove that attendance at art museums dropped 16.8%, even as the population grew more than 33 million people, and museums began offering free admission. So the public is noticing a lack as well. In order to be better social agents, museums need to provide seating that encourages conversations, allow the museum to be a place where people can relax, use the museum as a source of inspiration. It's exhibitions like these at the OUMA that allow people to view the art within stories without an end, learn about mothering in West Africa, learn about all these different aspects that could be so far from their positionality while at the same time studying for a core midterm. And these are important experiences that we need to create in more museums and in more exhibitions. I think a museum that really demonstrates what it's like to have engagement is the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History. At the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History, they have a current initiative, which you can see right in the center, called Hearts for Arts, where members who come and visit the museum, or anyone who comes and visits the museum, is given an assortment of hearts, and they can place it in front of their favorite objects within the collection. Similarly, they do something year-round where people can select what objects belong in the museum and which ones they find are relevant to the community. The community decides the collection. They also have invitations to perform, to do programs from the public. Their Co-Create initiative allows people to get involved in every facet and every aspect of the museum. And museum administrators can't do it all, and this museum shows that they probably shouldn't. Their Co-Create initiative has had great results. First, they had 17,000 visitors in 2011 and 148,000 in 2018. They received $7K in funding in 2011 and $3 million in 2018, and they went from 25 events in 2011 to 800 events within 2018. So we can see that the public is pretty intrigued and excited about what they can do at the Santa Cruz. We tell visitors that these objects and the experiences that they have in museums are theirs, that they determine their collections, but the Santa Cruz shows us that that's not always true unless you're doing initiatives similar to theirs. It's these initiatives that make them theirs, and they can be their own curators within this museum. The International Museum of Folk Art does a similar initiative where their Gallery of Consciousness, inaugurated in 2010, is a visionary example of how museums are experimenting in this field. The gallery's goal is to be an agent of positive social change by engaging history, dialogue, and personal reflections around issues of social justice and human rights. Since the gallery's inception, exhibits in the space have explored how traditional artists come together to face change or disaster to provide comfort, counsel, prayer, and hope through their art. This focus has earned the space membership in the International Coalition of Sites of Consciousness And exhibitions in the Gallery of Consciousness are community-driven, co-created, collaborative, participatory, and accumulative. And visitors and community members become a part of the conversation from the very beginning, helping to shape that exhibition and contribute to the dialogue throughout that exhibition's run. They put this particularly to the test in 2013 with their Let's Talk About This exhibition, which focused on HIV and AIDS within the LGBTQ community, and the oral histories that were collected were incorporated into the exhibition through listening stations and also became a part of the dialogue-based programs related to the exhibition. It's experiences like these that make our objects more powerful. When people have more opportunities for conversations, they're not feeling limited. Guests can read about wars, colonialism, gentrification, race, sexuality, or beautiful objects, but they aren't given the vehicles to properly articulate their feelings on the subject. It's like taking a class without having projects or tests or any application of the knowledge. You get to view, but there's no real reason for you to retain it. So museums have the capability to answer Gauguin's questions of where do we come from, what are we, and where are we going within the objects, but only if we allow these conversations to happen. So that in a time of division, when we see images like this, we can have cultural engagement. Looking at works from times other than ours, from positionalities other than ours, allows us to have empathy and understanding of individuals and concepts. It gives us the room to talk about literally anything else besides the media or besides the issues that we face today. It gives us the educational distractions that we need. Too many community-based projects like the ones that I discussed at the Santa Cruz and at the Folk Museum are relegated to education staff and isolated from the core mission of an institution or left entirely invisible. And this lack of support isn't just within the museum's walls. When journalists, scholars, and critics write about museum exhibitions, they can ignore spaces that invite visitor engagement and community participation. And even within the field of museum education, people refer to empathy-building practices and effective learning strategies as too touchy-feely. So the issue here is that we're not allowing the public to decide in the way that they would like. Museums are spaces for education, learning, fun, and experiences. So why aren't we listening to the public? Why aren't we creating the experiences they demand? But they can also serve a powerful role in our communities as active spaces of connection and coming together for conversation and dialogue, for listening and sharing. Museums can be spaces for individual stories and community voices. They can be spaces for acknowledging and reflecting on differences, for bridging divides. They can be spaces for growth, struggle, love, and hope. So as institutions, the changes we need to make are clear. We need to make a commitment to improve a museum's social impact, meaning having strategic goals, reflect on the current impacts and listen to users and non-users and research local needs, allocate resources, innovate and be willing to take risks, and bring more voices into interpretation and evolving power. And as a visitor, demand your right to collaborate and create. These institutions are yours. They belong to you. You find them. Museums belong to you, and they should be treated as such. Thank you.
Thank you, Taylor. That was terrific. I also grew up in Chicago and spent many visits at the Adler Planetarium, Museum of Science and Industry. But my question, so I have kids, and when you have kids, they tend to want to go to active museums like children's museums or science museums. Not always art museums because older kids. I'm wondering what you think about, I love that idea when you put the heart by the painting that you like. I think that's terrific. But these headphones that people wear, do they make a difference for you in terms of social? So partly I'm asking because I think for me, they help me a lot focus what I'm doing when I'm walking around a museum if I don't know anything. But for younger kids, I also don't want who are used to listening and viewing things. But then they also don't get a chance to talk about this. You know, some of the best experiences in an art museum come from just talking to somebody about, you know, what do you think the the artist manager, or, how do you feel about this? And I also wonder whether those having headphones on through the whole thing then isolates everyone. But,
I gotcha. I think that the audio guides are great ways for people to learn about the objects that they're viewing. But I do think that it's isolating. It doesn't facilitate conversation, and it still has that issue of not allowing people to retain knowledge. You may hear it instead of reading it, and that may last a little bit longer, but it's those conversations, that participation, that's going to make your art experiences more meaningful.
Piggyback on that, I can't remember which piece of this was, but I love the heart idea as well. That's really neat. There are museums where you can walk in and you can choose to wear a sticker that says, something like "chat me up" or "talk to me," and it's something like that about whether or not you want to chat with somebody about the work that you're looking at. I think sometimes it can be isolating unless you go as a sort of little posse or group of people. You go to the museum and say you're there with your kids, right? And everybody's feeling like it's a passive experience. But museums that get you to engage in this kind of one-off way are more exciting. Or having docents that simply wander through the galleries. We've seen this before, where they're wearing a sign that says "Staff, ask me." I happen to be here.
So Taylor, you're talking a lot about education departments and visitor engagement and working through education, but the notion that the public should play a role in, say, curatorial, how would they do that? How would the public work with curatorial staff to make a more engaged experience?
I think it's about opening up the museum, so allowing suggestions to be taken seriously and facilitating or creating an environment where guests feel comfortable doing so. So it would be, if there is a suggestion box, let them know that there aren't limits to their suggestion.
Right.
If they want to see a certain exhibition at the museum, don't necessarily tell them that it's possible, because as we know, sometimes it's not.
Right.
But let them know that those ideas are encouraged.
What sparked your original interest in the museums and art?
Like in general? That's a hard question.
Back when you were 12.
Yeah.
Way back.
I've been growing up going to museums after school or after my dad got off work. We would just go to the Art Institute on Thursdays because it's free on Thursdays. I would go to the Art Institute in school to see the Latin lectures for my Latin class. I've just been going to museums my entire life, and I think art museums struck me partially because it was a challenge. Because I think science museums and like the Adler Planetarium, I think there's so much that they're doing. And with art museums, I love art, and I'd also love to just see how they can expand into new work.
Yeah, regarding the Santa Cruz Museum, do their programs hew to more of the local population? I saw the Hispanic dance and costume, probably from mid-19th century. But how do they plan their programs to draw in such large crowds?
I think part of it is that within our co-create initiative, visitors and people who are interested can submit whatever programs that they would like. And the museum is very much their source locally, and they get a lot of their programs and initiatives from the locals themselves. I think I forgot the second part of your question. I'm really sorry.
Oh no, I was just wondering how much they pay attention to the local population and what those diverse groups are.
I think a part of it is that they are embedded in the population. Not only does the Santa Cruz function as a museum, but they also have a community garden. They participate in the cemetery where they bring stories to life. So they know who their people are, and it's really just about attracting local visitors and keeping them coming.
How did you learn about the Santa Cruz Museum?
Just researching. I wanted to see what kind of interactions or interactive experiences museums were creating besides the ones that we know about, and it just came across as one that is purely interactive.
Is it associated with a local government, with the city government, or is it a private foundation?
I'm actually not sure. I know that they receive government funding, and they're also a nonprofit organization,
Right.
but I'm not sure whether or not it's a government initiative.
I want to add one thing about, yet again, talking about Taylor and what she's done. She's one of about 3 students who encouraged SGA to consider, and then it was voted and passed, to allocate funding to try to get an acquisition to better reflect the student body. And so I think, she's putting SGA's money where her mouth is, really. and really trying to do things that get the students engaged, and you've been a big piece of that.
You all should come to OUMA Nights on March 28th.
Mhm.
Yes. OUMA Nights is a pop-up shop, a student exhibition, and the third element we're thinking about doing is a mural, and it's basically an almost entirely student-ran program, and so it's just a great opportunity to see engagement and action. So thank you.